Welcome to Inspirations TV, where our intention is not only to inspire you, but to offer you helpful tools and resources of valuable information to assist you in living a fulfilling life in all areas. Today, we'll be discussing single shaming with Dr. Karin Anderson Abrell, a psychologist, author, international speaker, musician, and host of the podcast Love and Life. A former psychotherapist and professor, Dr. Anderson Abrell's platform integrates clinical expertise with an emphasis on cognitive behavioral therapy and data gleaned from psych research. Her writing, speaking, and podcasting delve into all the good stuff. How to have true intimacy in romantic relationships, more meaningful friendships, healthier family connections, and more fulfilling careers. Her book, Single is the New Black, Don't Wear White Till It's Right, is a word of empowerment to singles, encouraging them to stay strong amidst single shaming, live life on their own terms, and to never ever settle for anything less than an extraordinary relationship. Her second book, I Don't, A Guide to the Runaway Bride, is set to be published this year. All right, and thank you. Welcome to the show, Dr. Karin Anderson Abrell, just outside of Chicago. Thank you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join you, Nazra. It's a real pleasure.
Definitely. So I'm really excited about today's topic. So today's topic is single shaming. And we hear all kinds of shaming, mom shaming, slut shaming, all kinds of shaming, but we don't really hear as much about single shaming. So I'm really excited about today's topic. So I know you recently released your book, Single is the New Black, Don't Wear White Till It's Right. Love that title, by the way. Excellent title. And so I'm a big fan of your social media content. Like, you're always pumping out just like really amazing content. So why not just tell us a little bit about one, like why you thought this topic was so important and why you chose this particular title?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for all the kind words and for connecting with me via social media. As far as Singles New Black, Don't Wear White Till It's Right, people tell you, write what you know. And so I wrote what I knew, which was that in the dating relationship space, there are a lot of people who have the best intentions, psychologists and therapists and experts who want to help single people find what they want, which is love. Yeah. And I get it. They do a great job of trying to present these step-by-step formulae to get to the guy or get to the girl. And my experience as a psychologist myself, I felt that oftentimes those formulaic approaches weren't, again, I think people are coming from the best place, but I don't think they're genuine. I don't think love is like a math formula. I don't think love is something that's so easy to concretize such that you can say, here's my 5-step plan and he'll show up on a white horse tomorrow. Right. It just doesn't work that way. And so I was looking, my story is long and involved, but professionally, psychologist, I was a therapist and a professor for 10 years, and all these things in my professional life are going as planned, and I'm thriving here, but my personal life was a little bit more arduous. I had a lot of heartbreak, a lot of serial monogamy, even called off a wedding 2 months before it was supposed to happen at age 34. Wow. I was back on the dating scene, yes, as a 34-year-old woman living in Chicago. And I do what a lot of people do. I went to the self-help section and looked for those books and found the messages that I was speaking to a moment ago and found that they were the opposite of self-help. I was more discouraged when I left the self-help section because the message was essentially, you were fundamentally flawed. There was something fundamentally wrong with you, which is why you're still single at 34. Right. And I thought, disempowering, disparaging, and not true. It is single shaming at its best, yet it's packaged in the self-help section, trying to ostensibly encourage and empower. Right. So I said, I got to write the book. And my dad was like, you're a psychologist. You better write the book. I was like, okay, let's do this.
Exactly. I love it. Because I feel exactly the same way. I see so many, friends out there who are just kind of going between like this seminar and this podcast and this YouTube channel and this follower and that book. And they really have like this very strong sense of despair, you know, like something's wrong. And I was just thinking, you know, why not, while you're single, just be single? You know, that's an idea. But, you know, for some people, that's just like, oh my God, no, like I can't do that. So, you know, I love that. So, like from your perspective, because my perspective is, you know, I'm sure shared among like others, like what do you feel like, if you could just kind of like define like what single shaming is, like, you know, in more, I guess, elaborate detail?
So single shaming is just like any other shaming. It's this assumption that you're doing something wrong. And that's why you're dealing with what you're dealing with. And Nazra, it's a bigger problem than what people really understand. So there's an article, a paper, a research study out of the University of Toronto in 2013 that looked at the relationship between people being afraid of being single and their tendency to settle for less in relationships. So now we have psychologists, researchers in labs doing legit social science research to find that when we fear being single, we will settle for less in relationships. We will consider dating people who we're not that excited about, but wow, it's better than being single, right? And then we will stay in relationships that we don't even enjoy, that aren't very fulfilling, that we aren't into this person, but we're going to stay in that relationship for fear of being single. It's because of the single shaming in our culture. Why would I fear being single unless I'm assuming that everyone around me thinks that there's something wrong with me? Being single in and of itself is benign. It's just a state, right? It's a status of life. It doesn't have to mean anything, except so many members of society have given it meaning. They've ascribed to it that, oh, well, you know, that's why he's single. That's why she's still single, because they're a nut job, or they're crazy, or they're whatever. Definitely. And then we internalize this and make horrible, soul-crushing mistakes. And now we have the research to prove it.
Ooh, I love that. I love that. Because I mean, because like you said, like there are so many well-intentioned people out there. You know, I have friends who are married or in relationship with someone, and, you know, it's kind of like this thing of, well, let me help you, you know, if you're single. So, and it's just like, I didn't, not only did I not ask for the help, it's not necessary. You're actually trying to solve something that isn't a problem. And so I made a list of just kind of different examples of single shaming that I've heard people say like over the years, like whether they're saying it about themselves or about other people, and just questions. Because again, I think people a lot of times think it's very innocent. They think it's very helpful. They're just making conversation, but they don't realize like the subtext behind it. So let's dive into my first one, which is, so are you seeing anyone? And then, you know, it's okay. He's out there. Be patient. You know, you'll find him. Why is that single shaming?
Well, you've alluded to it already. A lot of these comments are, they're coming from a pure place. Yeah. But they're more about your friend or your family member's discomfort with you being single, more so than it is you. Like, you're probably just fine living your life. But they're uncomfortable with you being single. It's distressing for them. So then they have to ask you all the time, when really you'd like, hey, can we talk about the new podcast that I'm starting? Or can we talk about my career or my volunteer work or the dog I just adopted from the shelter? I have a lot of other things in my life that are very, very key and core to who I am. Can we talk about those for half a second? But it's more about them and their discomfort. And that's why they're asking these questions and giving you these pat answers. Oh, someone's out there, don't worry. And you're like, I didn't say I was worried, but okay.
Right. Exactly. I know. I remember like one year I had this, it was like a birthday dinner, and it was, you know, just like a small group of girls. And, you know, one of the friends asked one of my other friends, like, so are you seeing anyone? And, you know, just like, well, you know, no, but I'm on this app or what have you. And she says, oh, okay, well, it's okay. Be patient. You know, he's out there. And I just saw her face just go from really upbeat and happy, not even thinking about it, to just kind of going, just so like somber and kind of disappointed of like, right. Yeah, I guess, you know, and I felt so bad because for one, we weren't even talking about it. you know, and two, it's just like, why have someone feel like they need to be on this constant hunt, you know, for another person? And, you know, it's just one of those things. I think it's so common. I think that people don't even recognize it.
They don't even recognize it, Nazra. And my heart just aches for that story. I lived that story. I didn't get married until I was 42. You know, I've mentioned after I called off my wedding at 34, I was on the scene for another 6 years. I met my husband at 40, got married at 42. So I've heard all of those statements. And again, I know someone is trying to, they're trying to say something encouraging, but the subtext there is that don't worry, he's out there. And the subtext beneath that is, and if because you know, you won't be okay unless you get married. You know, you won't be okay if you're single for forever.
Right.
Says who? Says who that you have to be defined by your relationship status, that your happiness comes from your partner, which also, sidebar, is a horrible recipe. Like the goal of life is to meet your own needs, to be comfortable in your own skin, to be responsible for your own emotional health and well-being, not to be like, oh, as soon as I find a partner, I'll be happy. That is a horrible burden to ask a partner to make you happy, to fill me, complete me, validate me, all those things. So, but it's so deep and complex. So I'm glad we had this time to really tease it apart with all your different examples.
I know. I love it. Because I feel like it's all in the examples, because sometimes people will just go, oh, well, I don't shame anyone. You know, it's like, not deliberately, maybe not consciously, you know, for sure. Okay. So what about, so why are you single and you have to get out there?
Oh, yeah. So I address both of those in my book. I have an entire chapter about you don't have to get back out there. That's everyone's favorite little throwaway cliche answer. Yeah. And again, it's about them like, oh gosh, I'm so uncomfortable with the fact that Nazra's single. It stresses me out because I want her to have somebody. And again, that's all about their messaging, their beliefs that are part of their life. And doesn't have anything to do with you. No. But so then they throw this little pat answer, just get back out there. And they're like, whew, I gave her some great advice. She's going to be so much happier. She's going to find him real soon. It's absurd. And then the question, why are you still single? One of my most popular Instagram posts was something where I said, and I meant it. I didn't mean to be snarky. I try not to do that because I know that single women can be accused of being, well, she must not like men. She must be bitter, angry, you know, spinster. You know, there's so many pejorative assumptions about single women. So I try not to be snarky in my posts, but I did one time post and people really resonated with it. I said, I don't ask you why you're still married. So please don't ask me why I'm still single.
Love that. Love that. Exactly.
It's a very, I understand. Again, I share this story, which is crazy. I was at this bat mitzvah. I was in a band when I lived in Chicago. I was still single. And I was at my bandmate was a piano player. Her daughter has a bat mitzvah in the North Shore of Chicago. Beautiful party. Run into some other musicians, Chicago musicians, North Shore musicians. And so I'm talking to this guy. I'd never met him before, but he was also in a band. And we get to talking. He plays guitar. I'm a vocalist. I write songs. I play a little bit of keyboards, blah, blah, blah. But we're just talking and about like 10 minutes into our conversation, after he told me that his wife and his 2 kids were in Israel for the summer. So he was like, woohoo, like basically saying the cats are away, the mouse is going to play, all this. He's all excited that his family's gone for 3 months. And then he looks at me, he's like, how is a girl like you still single? And I'm thinking, what? Okay, if I told my girlfriends this, they'd probably be like, yeah, well, he probably found you attractive and found you really nice. And what, gosh, it doesn't make sense that at 38 or whatever I was at the time that you're still single. So I get that it came from a place, probably almost a weird kind of backhanded compliment. Right. But in my head, I was thinking, I don't ask you why you're so thrilled about your marriage that you cannot be jumping for joy more than the fact that your wife's away from you for 3 months. I mean, what kind of crap marriage is that? I didn't say that to him, but he felt no qualms about saying something which I felt was a very invasive personal question to ask someone you met 10 minutes ago.
Absolutely.
But we have very different standards for what is appropriate conversation to ask single people, to ask married people.
Ooh, yeah, that's a really good point. I like that. That's a very important point, I think, to know. So, okay. So what about, what are you waiting for? And my favorite is, you don't want to wait too long. That one like really gets me, and I'll go into like later why like that one really much. Okay, you know, I'll just go ahead and say like why that one.
Go ahead.
Because don't wait too long. It's like you're saying that somehow you're going to miss out on love if you don't strike now. Why?
Well, because again, the underlying message there is if you're single for forever, you will have a less valid life. Your existence as a human being on this planet will be less valid. I mean, women are still primarily assessed and valued for our relationships. Men are assessed and valued for their earning potential, if they have a high-powered job, do they drive the right car. Women, it's still who you dating. What's he do, right? And so my status is elevated if I'm dating someone who's got high power, right? Then that means that, oh, she's dating a doctor, she's dating a CEO, right? And then she's married to a doctor CEO. And then it goes to, well, how many kids do you have? Right. Oh, really? Is your kid the quarterback? Is he the MVP? Is your daughter the head cheerleader? I mean, we're always assessed and valued by these other people in our lives, right? So, and it's absurd, but that's where that's coming from. So the idea that if someone would remain single for their entire life, and for anyone who is interested in more psych research on single shaming, there's a woman called Dr. Bella DePaulo, and she has done her entire body of research, not her entire, but a great majority of her research has been on what she calls singleism, which is a kind of, just like any ism out there. And she does tons of research that shows, again, that this is not just me going, well, I was single for so long, so I'm a little sensitive to it. No, there's legit psych research on this, that it exists and that people are discriminated against because of their single status. And I can't go into all her studies because we don't have time, but anyone who wants to check that out, her book is called Singled Out. And it's a fantastic book. But the idea there is that if I'm somehow less valid as a human being in this society if I do not have a partner. And so what they're telling you is don't wait too long because you might miss your chance, your shelf life. I mean, you look pretty good now, Nazra, but in 10 years, seriously.
That's what they're saying. And I really don't think they realize that that's what they're saying. You're basically saying that, somehow there's an expiration date to love. And it just, and all the like romantic comedies out there that always like end in like, oh, okay, now she met someone, so now she's okay, and something was wrong with her before when she wasn't with someone. And it's just like, there are different iterations of a happily ever after. And, nothing is guaranteed to your happiness.
Yeah, and those are all the topics I cover in my book because it's this notion that, oh, you were this quirky, lovelorn, kind of screw up, but then he swooped in and saved the day, and now you have meaning and purpose, and your life is somehow worthy. And it's really kind of crazy, Nazra, that we claim that we've had a women's movement, but we're still validated by the men in our lives.
Wow. Yeah. That's huge. I think that's really huge because I think that, we really, it's not that we have to be anti anything, like anti-love or anything like that, but just to get people out of, that mindset of, well, hold on. Okay, this is a little riddle. Okay, let's figure out how to change you and how to get you, happy. So that kind of like, I guess, is a good, lead in for, things that I've heard other single, women say, like, well, I don't want to be alone forever, or I don't want to be unhappy forever. So what would you say to like speak to one, like single women who kind of shame themselves, and their, family or friends or whoever who might be kind of saying the same thing to them?
Yeah, well, I have an entire chapter in my book called Quit Worrying About Being Alone for Forever. Because what that does is the fear-based place of operating. And like I said before, the research shows that if I'm afraid of being single, if I'm so fearful of being single, and then if I subscribe to a belief of I'm single in this moment. That means I'm going to be single for forever. And that is the worst thing that could possibly happen to me.
Yeah.
That's a decision I'm making, a belief I'm choosing to adhere to.
Right.
And I could just as easily choose to say, yes, I desire partnership, but I'm not going to view my life and my existence as somehow less valid and important in this world based on whether or not I'm in partnership. And I'm going to decide whether I'm going to be happy. I'm not going to turn over my happiness to some person who may or may not exist.
Right.
It's probably out there, but let's say I have another 5 years before he happens to stroll down my path. What am I going to do? Be miserable for 5 years?
Right.
That's my choice. We as women who are empowered, we want to be empowered, then we have to own our beliefs that we are ascribing to. I don't have to ascribe to that belief system. I can choose different beliefs. And so I talk about this in the book and I unpack it. And frankly, we get caught up in a lot of this fear it's rooted in these irrational beliefs. Like I said, because I'm single now, that means for sure I'll be single for forever. Because I'm alone now, that means I'm be alone for forever. Also, because I'm alone, it means I have to be lonely. Because frankly, I don't have to be lonely. And those are not the same things. So it's a lot of belief work. And I unpack that in my book. And that's one of the things that anyone who checks out my Instagram page, I'm always going into those underlying beliefs because that's where the power is. I can't change the reality. So the husband I married, the man I married, I was engaged before, as I spoke to, but my husband was married to someone else for 23 years. I lived in Chicago. He lived in Northwest Indiana. We never knew each other. I didn't meet him until we met through a dating service after he got divorced, obviously. So all those years in Chicago, I could have beat myself up like, what are you doing wrong? You're so screwed up. Why can't you get it right? Well, guess what? The love of my life, the person I was meant to spend my life with, happened to be married to someone else and lived an hour away.
Exactly.
I couldn't have made that happen any faster. There was nothing internally within me, like you spoke to, that I needed to fix. I didn't have to become a better version. Be the best version of you for you. But it wasn't that I was somehow tragically flawed in some specific area. And once I got that right, per all these self-help authors, then all of a sudden, Prince Charming would ride up on the horse. My Prince Charming was not going to ride up on the horse until he got out of the marriage that wasn't working, got on a dating service, and met me. I could not have rushed that. And that's my message to all women is to recognize what you can control and what you can't. And don't fall prey to these messages that are suggesting that you are somehow completely screwed up and that's why you're single.
Right. Definitely. Love that. I love that because it really just, I've heard so many times like, well, I just want you to be happy or you just don't want to give up. And I'm just going, you know what? Who said I wasn't happy?
Right.
Like who said that? Who got that? I wasn't thinking it. I wasn't sitting over here going like, oh, I'm just so unhappy, like wringing my hands, like, oh, I've given up. I remember I got this text like years ago, like from a girl I used to hang out with. And she says, so do you feel like, she's like, have you given up? And I'm like, on what? Love? And I'm like, oh my God, can you just like stop with the romantic comedy? Just pull the romantic comedy out of your butt. Like, I just like really, like, I have not given up on love. That's just, no. Speak to that.
Well, what kills me as you're talking, I'm just thinking about, look at you, you're stunning. And so, but that's part of the problem, really, right? Because if you weren't so beautiful, then people would be like, well, she could do a little something, put on a little makeup, go get a stylist. Because people were, again, and this is cognitive processing. So our brains are very efficient and they want to make sense. So they see someone like you who's stunning and gorgeous and they go, this does not make sense. This does not compute. So then we have to find rational, because again, our brains are efficient and they want to make meaning. We want to solve the riddle. We want to solve the problem. Whether you're saying it's a problem or not is irrelevant. They want to solve the problem, right? And so that's what's going on there. So again, it's probably a compliment, but I get that it doesn't feel like that because I sure didn't take it that way when people said those things to me. I was just like, can we just stop acting like the only thing worth talking about is my status, my relationship status? And frankly, let's be honest, there's so many people who like you said, they just live that romantic comedy life. They marry someone because, oh, I don't know, it's time. We've been dating 4 years. It's the next logical step. I'm about to turn 30 and who wants to be 30 single? I'm about to turn 40. Who wants to be 40 single? I mean, people get married for the worst reasons. My next book is going to be about calling off my wedding. I know we need more resources for people who get engaged like I did for the wrong reasons.
Yes.
And then have to examine that engagement and go, am I doing this because it's really my heart's desire to partner with this person for the rest of my life? Or am I doing this because I'm 34 and the clock is ticking and I want the life that looks so appealing from everyone else? But people, so many of those people, Nazra, are living phony lives. But no one shines a spotlight on them and goes, why'd you marry that guy when clearly everyone knew you weren't in love with him, right? We go, oh, they're getting married. I guess I'll go buy the gravy boat off their registry. I mean, we have such different, like I said earlier, there's permission to examine singles in a way and put them under the microscope that we do not allow people to examine couples, because coupling up is the norm. It's sanctioned by society, and being single too long is abnormal and not sanctioned by society.
Oof. Oh, I love that part. That was really good. Yeah, because I think that all the time, like sometimes like when, you know friends who are coupled, but you know that they're not really that happy. They want kids, they're of a certain age, and it's just kind of like this expected thing. And I'm just kind of like, keeping my thoughts to myself and my comments to myself. But again, like, it's just this societal norm that people are just locked into that says, well, that's okay. Like, that's okay to be coupled.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember like, even for a time, like I entered into a relationship that was very toxic, very unhealthy, simply because the friends that I had at that time that I was spending the most time with kind of single shamed me into thinking that somehow it was in my best interest. And they would even say things to me like, oh, you see, now you're happy now. And the thing is that what people didn't know, I wasn't. I was actually secretly miserable, but I had gotten into it. I didn't really know how to get out of it, but I just kind of stayed. But on the outside looking in, people were just like, oh my gosh, you guys are so cute. Oh, you're so adorable. Oh, he seems so nice. And, and you guys are just so, oh, I want something like what you have. And I'm just thinking like, no, really, you do not want like the friendship part. Yeah. But like the relationship part, absolutely not. So, I really appreciate that you say that, because I really want to move into attachment theory, because I'm really obsessed with attachment theory and attachment styles. And I think that one of the ideas, again, like in this flawed, single model, or at least, our perception of a flawed single model, is that somehow like maybe we are more attachment avoidant or more anxious, like we're just too scared, or we're just too closed off, or, we're not somehow secure. Speak to attachment theory as it relates to, singleism, if you will.
Yeah. I have a podcast episode with Dr. Duana Welch. She's a psychologist she wrote the books Love Factually. And there's 2 episodes. One is episode 92, and she looks at evolutionary psychology and what we can learn from all cultures and even non-human primates about the different perspectives that we bring as men and women to the dating landscape. So it's a really fascinating science-based podcast episode. That's 92. And then in episode 102, she speaks to attachment styles. And it's one of the most popular, I think it's the most popular episode, because people love it. Like you, they're fascinated by it. You can certainly interpret someone who is single for a long time, someone like me who didn't get married until age 42.
Sure.
Someone could say she must have been avoidantly attached, right? She had avoidant attachment, and that's why she couldn't connect. Well, I would take issue with that. Again, my stance is that there's too much pathologizing throughout our culture. This goes into another topic, but it's related. Someone is sad for 5 minutes because they lost their pet dog or their grandmother passed away, and then we give them a diagnosis of clinical depression and we try to put them on medication. We have a very low tolerance for the full range of emotions that are part of the human condition. Part of the experience of being a human is to have a full range of emotion, and not every day is meant to be a mountaintop day. Now, bringing this back to attachment styles, I personally don't believe that every person who's 42 and still single has avoidant attachment. I don't believe it. I think that some people don't meet their person because their person is living in California and they live in New York. And when the person moves from California to New York because of a job transfer, and then happens to get the apartment next to theirs, and they bump into each other in the laundry room at the apartment, that's when they're going to meet. And you cannot rush that because the person didn't move until the job was available in New York. I mean, this is the kind of thing that drives me crazy. I don't want to pathologize everyone as being avoidantly attached. That being said, I do have a lot of members of my community who say, I do think my attachment is part of what's going into my dating relationship scenario. So if someone feels that that is something they're dealing with, please check out my episode. My podcast is called Love and Life with Dr. Karin, and that's episode 102. And I think that could be very helpful. But I'm just, as a psychologist, I'm kind of like the weird psychologist who doesn't want to diagnose people all the time. I'm actually I'm like, can we just think you're normal and that you're allowed to have a full range of experiences? Other psychologists are more quick to diagnose. That's not me. So honestly, I think there's something to it to a degree. And I also think that we have to remember that sometimes love doesn't play out on the timetable that we maybe would have anticipated or hoped for. And it doesn't mean that there's an attachment issue necessarily happening.
Right. I love that. I think that's so great because you see all the coupled people in the world and I definitely have noticed, them being more like detached and, not really connected to the person. It's more again about status of, oh, well, he does this for a living or he does that for a living or, you know what I mean? Or, I'm just so tired of being alone. And I'm just like, I don't want someone with me just because they're afraid to be alone, to be with me for me, it's like, that's our connection.
Well, I mean, just think about it this way, as you're saying, putting it into that realm, like how completely unloving would it have been for me to actually go through with my engagement, to walk down the aisle to someone who I was really just feeling was a very great person and was a great man. He was a very kind, smart, successful, drove the right car, had the right job, would have been an amazing father, great qualities, just not my guy.
Right.
How would that have been loving for me to go, yeah, you're good enough. You'll do. No, he deserves, and so does every person on this planet, deserves someone who, like you said, is crazy about them. Not just like, oh, you'll fill the void that I have because I'm feeling lonely and incomplete without a partner. So you'll do. Who wants that? No one says, oh, thank you so much for settling for me. Dr. Duana Welch puts it that way. And I love that. Yeah. She's like, no one ever said, thank you so much for settling for me. No one wants that. So let's stop doing that. It's selfish. And it took me a while to believe that. The first couple months after I called off my wedding, I felt like a train wreck. I felt like a disaster. I was really self-disparaging. I thought, Karin, you were a psychologist. How did you stay with this person for so long and then agree to marry him and then 2 months before the wedding have to put on your running shoes and take off? But it was later that I realized it was the most loving thing I could do to not marry someone who was just good enough. He deserved someone who that was his person. He deserves to find his person. And that's, you have to look at it that way as well. It's not kind to settle for someone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I feel like that's almost like the epitome of selfish, to kind of think that that other person is going to be miserable without you, instead of, why not they find their person and I find my person, and then, we can be happy, but in a healthy way where it's not about just kind of sparing us from, lonely misery. So I love that. And I think, so one of my last ones are, one, like either you're secretly gay or somehow you're just anti-love and you're anti-relationship. What do you think about that? Because I've definitely encountered those myths in my life, and I'm just going, I personally find it pretty narrow-minded to think that, but what is your take as a professional?
Yeah. I mean, I guess let me speak to the anti-love. It's such an extreme position, right? Just because you don't have a series of partners in a span or a time or season of your life where someone expects you to have all these partners, that means you're anti-love. You could flip that. You could say it's the opposite, because I won't settle for a mediocre. I'm so pro-love that I want something extraordinary. And I always tell my women in my community, we're looking for epic love. We're not looking for just mediocre, kind of phoning it in relationships. We're not. And especially after we've waited for a while. So by the time I hit 40 and I'd already called off a wedding, which was super hard. And then I had another love affair that was 2 years, and that dragged on again, off again. And that was heart-wrenching. So by the time I hit 40, I'm like, listen, if it's not epic, I'm okay. Unless it's the kind of love that people like write poems and love songs. And then I wrote a lot of love songs for my husband, because the other songs I was writing were all about getting my heart broken. But unless it's like that, I don't want it. I don't want anything other than that. And I've waited long enough, especially when you get older, you're like, I've waited long enough. I know I can be happy on my own. So why would I want? So it really, the person who waits is pro-love. They're probably more pro-love than the people who get married and just settle for someone earlier in life.
That part.
As for the gay thing, I don't even know where to go with that. I think anyone who's single for a period of time is going to hear something like that. And of course, we can just say, that's interesting. You would think that. And if I were gay, I would hope that wouldn't matter. I mean, I guess that's what I'd say. If someone actually articulated that, actually vocalized that, I would just probably respond with that. I'd say, wow, that's interesting, but I hope that if I am gay, because maybe I am, I don't know, that we'll still be friends because you're not a homophobe.
Right. Right. It's just so funny to me, like how traditional people are, as much as they want to think they have like this evolved kind of growth sort of mindset. And, like you said, like the whole women's movement, like they're, whether it's like you want to say feminism or you want to say, just like, all about female empowerment, it's just so funny to me how we still have these like hardwired, beliefs about what it means, like the meaning that we assign to people just because of, their status. So
for sure.
I think that's so fascinating. So what would you say, like, because we kind of talked about like the consequences of people kind of getting single shamed into a relationship. So we definitely covered that. But what would you say are like some of the best ways that people can sort of reevaluate like their tendencies to single shame, like whether they're single shaming themselves, they're single shaming other people? How can they kind of transition from treating being single as a problem that needs to be solved into like just a healthy choice that should actually be celebrated and respected and accepted?
It really should be celebrated. It really should be celebrated, and it should be applauded, because it takes a lot of courage, frankly. It does. And that's the entire message of my book, is that we need to reframe how we view singles, starting with ourselves, right? Because I can't control what someone else is going to say, but I can, if someone's reading my book, I can try to help her or him. I've had men read my book, but normally women are reading these kinds of relationship dating books. But I can try to help her, like you said, reevaluate her own assessment of herself. And that's where the power lies, like I spoke to earlier. What are your beliefs? Because your beliefs are fueling your thoughts, and your thoughts are fueling your feelings. So if you're feeling bad about being single, there is a thought beneath that you're telling yourself. Let's unpack that. And let's replace that with a different thought. Let's go even further. Let's look at the belief. Right? What's the meaning that we're ascribing to the fact that you're single? That's where we can start to really dissect what's going on and replace those irrational beliefs with rational, empowered, truly empowered beliefs. So for someone who is looking for more work like that, I mean, of course, my book, I would say my podcast, I have tons of episodes for singles. Also find pages like my Instagram page and others that are full of empowered messages for singles. There's a woman called Leslie Kaz, who has a book called Single Girl Bliss. It's fantastic. Leslie, she's late 40s now, and her thing is, listen, I'm not anti-love and I'm not anti-relationships, but I know that she said to herself, I need to stop the endless search. The endless search and the disappointments therein, that was making her miserable. So she took herself off the endless search for, she said initially 6 months.
Okay.
And then 6 months later, she's like, I'm happier than I've ever been. So I'm done with the search. Now, if the love of her life showed up, the UPS guy shows up with a package tomorrow and he's hot and they hit it off, she's happy to consider it. But she's no longer going to see her primary motivation in life is to every day wake up, how can I meet someone? So her account, her book is fantastic. There's also another woman on Instagram that I connected with called Single and Amazing. Okay. And her name is Debbie. She is all about just empowering singles. She was married years ago and again, got divorced and just has been happy. And it's just really redefining what it means, what happiness means, and recognizing, as you've been saying all along in this podcast, is that we decide if we're happy or not. Right. And if someone else thinks that we're unhappy just because we're single, that's on them. And, okay, whatever. Right. So as far as the women who are maybe looking for that own assessment themselves and to stop single shaming themselves, because we absolutely do that. Those are the kind of resources I would recommend. As far as other people, like if someone else happens upon this podcast, I would hope that they would, just from what we've shared right now, recognize that maybe that question that they're tempted to ask maybe really isn't any of their business. I mean, as a kind of blanket statement to people out there, I'd say if a single person doesn't bring up their own love life, they probably don't have anything to say about it, or they don't really care to speak to it. I would let a single person bring it up. If they don't, then talk about their cat, talk about the meal, or we're going to go get brunch next week if things are open, or you can talk about 100 million different other things. Yeah, because you don't know where that business is. Yeah, absolutely. So that would be my recommendation for people. It's not that hard not to single shame. If you just ask yourself, why do I want to know this? Right? What's so important that I know what's going on in their love life? Really? Can we talk about, let's talk about politics. Well, maybe not. People can't handle that. Or let's talk about the book I'm reading, or the Kardashians. Are they going to come back or not? Right. Exactly. There's a lot of other things to talk about.
There are. And that's one of the things that I've heard, singles talk about so much, is just that, I didn't really have anything to talk about because, it's not like I'm dating anyone and I'm not on an app. And I just think, how sad is that? Like that out of all of the options in the world of things to do and passions to have, that you would even want to bring into a new relationship that are already part of you, a new book I'm writing, or, a movie that I just saw or, whatever it is. I mean, there's just so many endless options of passions and loves to have in life to feel like you don't have any to contribute outside of that. It's just, it's a little sad. So
it really is.
Yeah. So I appreciate that. Because I feel like people, one, they need to be more self-aware, like of themselves. And and I think it really all comes down to being aware of yourself, right? Because again, like people who are asking you and you're not even bringing it up, like it's obviously about them and something they're doing about themselves of, well, how can I relate to her better? Because, we don't have this one thing out of everything to talk about. So a lot of people. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I hesitate to say this, Nazra, but I will say it. Sometimes I think just because I'm trying to encourage the single women here. Okay. I do think that sometimes people look at a woman who remains single and appears to be pretty darn happy. And like I said earlier, it perplexes them. And I think sometimes for some people, not all, I think some people go, dang, maybe I could have done that. Those people who got married super young because they were scared of adult life by themselves. They didn't think of it that way, but they maybe did fear paying their own bills, making their own way, figuring out things on their own. And I think sometimes they get that secure relationship in their 20s and they're like, whew, okay, I got my person. But then in their 30s, they realize, was this my person? But I can't do anything now. I've got 3 kids. And so they look at someone who took the harder route, frankly, I'm just going to say it. I think it's a more courageous route oftentimes. And I think sometimes they're a little jelly. And so some of those comments may be coming from a little bit not so pure place. I'm just throwing it out there for my single ladies.
Yeah. And I think it's good to know and good to kind of evaluate just so you can have like a sense of who's around you and the minds that, you know, are kind of, you know, influencing your life in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Great talk. I love this. So before I ask my last question, where can everyone find you online?
Yeah, so my website is loveandlifemedia.com. And I'm very busy on Instagram as my most, where I spend most of my time. And that's at Dr. Karin, and that's Dr.Karin. And my podcast is Love and Life with Dr. Karin. So those are the best ways to, I mean, I'm a little bit on Facebook, but those are the best ways to get a hold of me. I do offer consultations, virtual, obviously. I do a support group. So I run those kind of groups for women who just want to get a couple other single women who are looking for strategies to thrive in the midst of the single shaming and the dating realities.
Right.
And so I do that kind of stuff. So if anyone's interested, yeah, they can hit me up on those platforms.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Great. So for my final question, what, Dr. Karin, keeps you inspired?
I'm inspired by, so I'm a psych nerd, as you guys can tell. I throw the research in whenever I can. I'm really inspired by, when I was a professor for 10 years, there were a lot of times when I would be giving a lecture. The first 5 years I was teaching undergrad. The second 5 years of my tenure as a professor, I was teaching in a grad program, teaching people to become counselors and therapists. And there were so often times when I would be teaching and lecturing, and I'd be like, everyone needs to know this, not just people who are going to become counselors. Like, this stuff is so important that we could all benefit from this. So I'm really inspired by looking at research and then sharing it with the average person who isn't in a graduate program to become a therapist, right? Because we could all use these tools. The tools that I learned in my training as a therapist to teach clients are tools that I can teach my community. These are not, it's not the kind of thing that, I mean, therapy is a wonderfully profound experience that's unique. Yeah. That being said, we can also take some of those techniques and we can use them, we can implement them on our own lives. So I'm very inspired to take my background in psych, both the research and the clinical experience, and share it with as many people who are interested in learning those skills and techniques.
Fantastic. That sounds wonderful. So again, thank you again for joining us on our show. And we will definitely be watching and following you on Instagram and all of your posts. So thank you again. Have a great one.
Thanks, Nazra. I really appreciate the opportunity to share with your community.
Thank you, Dr. Karin.